Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to become one of the biggest Magic podcasts on the YouTube platform. So remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. But with that being said, let's get right into today's episode with some kind of final thoughts on EuroBasket. NBA.com did their 8 biggest takeaways from the EuroBasket tourney, focusing, of course, on the NBA talent within the tournament. And when it came to the Orlando Magic, the statement for them was that the Orlando Magic, as a franchise, should be very pleased with the things that they saw throughout EuroBasket, particularly for Franz Wagner and Tristan da Silva. The notes particularly say Wagner finished EuroBasket as Germany's leading scorer for the tournament, averaging 20.8 points per game. It was named to the All-Tournament team. His confidence should be sky high now after he played such an integral role en route to the championship. Da Silva performed admirably as well, capping his strong tournament with 13 points in the championship game. About to enter his second season, he excuse me. About to enter his second NBA season, he could become a key role player. This is an interesting little nugget of information that I thought was cool, or I thought was interesting to touch on because we talked about it in the last episode of Smidget as well. The only negative, and sounds like nitpicking, is Wagner's three-point shooting remains a concern. After he made 30% of his threes last regular season for the Orlando Magic, he made just 11 of 38 attempts from beyond the arc in EuroBasket, which equated to 29%. The persistent hitch in his long-range shooting motion still appears to be an issue. That was written by senior NBA writer Josh Robbins. So, again, very much positives for the Orlando Magic when seeing what Franz Wagner has been able to do as an elite level engine on the perimeter, as a guy you can give the ball to create offense. I thought that Tristan da Silva, as a knockdown three-point shooter, and particularly on the defensive end, was very effective throughout the entire tournament for Germany. That three-point shot for Franz Wagner is going to be a question, and I think it's going to continue to be a question until he proves otherwise, or until we see a difference in the mechanics of his shooting throughout the next season or two. It's going to be even more interesting given the player development coach that they have in Shamgod, who I think is going to be just as influential with a player like Franz Wagner as he is going to be with the guard rotation that they have. Of course, there's a lot of young guards within the Orlando Magic rotation. Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane is still relatively young. Jace Richardson added to the fray. Tyus Jones is more of a veteran presence. I think he'll be an interesting locker room guy to turn to. But the development of Franz Wagner, both as a movement shooter and catch and shoot shooter, are going to be so important if he's going to reach an elite level. The fact that he hovers around 29 to 32% from beyond the arc, it's scary. It's very dangerous, and it makes him a guy that's forced to put the ball on the floor in situations where a lot of these teams are already going to be packing the paint, focusing on the fact that Paolo Banchero draws so much attention around the rim and within the painted area. This is going to be an important aspect of the Orlando Magic all year long. Obviously, they can get guys like Bane, Suggs, Jace Richardson, Tyus Jones, Tristan da Silva to a lesser degree to be these high-level 37 plus percent three-point shooters from beyond the arc. Man, but if you cannot trust your star players to hit threes, and this is for Paolo Banchero and Franz, when you get to those closing moments of games, you're down by 3 points. 5 seconds left on the 5 seconds left on the clock, and you need to tie the game to send this joker to overtime. You can't put the ball in your best player's hands. That's for Paolo or Franz. You can't put the ball in your best player's hands to do anything more than be decoys to get a high-level three-point shot from others like Suggs or Desmond Bane. Is that a bad option? By no means. Of course not. But your best option in those games, particularly when we're talking about getting into a 7-game series, is to put the ball in the hands of your best player and to know that the decision-making around that is going to have to be geared away from your 2-star level forwards, because neither one of them are high-percentage three-point shooters. It's a dynamic that makes them easier to guard, especially in a 7-game series where the tape is out on you. We've been playing you for a minimum at least 4 games, and we know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And one of the biggest weaknesses is we can cut your stars off from beyond the arc because there are no threats from back there. That's dangerous. Franz is much more likely to be that threat from beyond the arc than Paolo is, simply because he has more on-ball chops on the perimeter. I think Paolo is a guy who, once he steps within 16 feet and operates within that mid-range area, that's where he's the most comfortable. Once he starts to take those steps further back, a little bit more dangerous. Very Kevin Garnett on offense, like when you talk about what Kevin Garnett was to the Boston Celtics, as a guy who was like a deep mid-range shooter, or a guy that was very good at back-to-the-basket operation, but not a guy that you would say, if he took that other 2 steps back beyond the arc, would be as lethal as he was as a shooter. Paulo Banchero, I think, a very similar scouting report. Franz Wagner, on the other hand, whose comps were a lot of the Gordon Haywards and things of that nature coming out of Michigan, that's never going to fully actualize itself to the manner in which this Orlando Magic team needs him to be if he can't shoot the three ball at least league average. And again, that's 35 to 36%, which for Franz would actually be a significant jump when, again, 29% in EuroBasket, 30% in the league last season, 35 to 36% is league average. That would be a significant jump for him, and it would be something that makes him that much more lethal. That's only an average level shooter, but when you're a guy who already averages 20 to 23 points per game without having the three ball in your repertoire, you add that in, and now all of a sudden you're a completely different kind of demon. You're a lot more dangerous on that offensive end, and it's one more thing that defense have to be accountable for. So just my last little bit of notes on EuroBasket now that it's officially over, and NBA.com pointed out something that I thought was going to be a big focus at the very beginning of EuroBasket. I mentioned that the 3-point shooting of Franz Wagner was something I'd be keeping my eye on from the very beginning throughout the entirety of the tournament, and from start to finish, the development, unfortunately, was not there, and something that's going to be a big question mark going into the 2025-2026 season. Let's move on to something else that NBA.com put together, which was their latest offseason power rankings, where they put the Orlando Magic as the number 3 team in the Eastern Conference behind the Cleveland Cavaliers and the New York Knicks. Pretty used to this at this point. Offseason has not really had too much movement in it. For those who do not remember, the Cleveland Cavaliers added Lonzo Ball and Larry Nance Jr. back to the roster while moving off of Ty Jerome, who went to Memphis, and Isaac Okoro, who was traded in that acquisition of Lonzo Ball to the Chicago Bulls. For the New York Knicks, they didn't have anybody leave, and they were able to bolster their bench up by bringing in Jordan Clarkson, Gershon Yabusele, and actually recently signed Malcolm Brogdon to be a backup point guard for them as well. So not losing very much anything outside of Tom Thibodeau, who they switch out for Mike Brown, and on the other side of it, add significant depth to their roster with a chance where they maybe could still bring in Preston Achua and Cameron Payne on some very lucrative deals. If not, their bench is still pretty solid, led by Jordan Clarkson, Malcolm Brogdon, Gershon Yabusele, and they also have Deuce McBride still there. So that's your main 4 off the bench, with Mitchell Robinson as your lead center, either behind or next to Karl Anthony Towns. So they have a pretty solid 10-man rotation, just giving them their flowers for what they've been able to do this offseason. Of course, for the Orlando Magic, they are a team that brought in Desmond Bane, Tyus Jones, in exchange for letting go of KCP, Cole Anthony, and Gary Harris. There's 3 things that they decided to touch on in this article. I'm not going to read all 3, but there's 2 things that I want to point out more particularly throughout not only this article, but something that I think is going to be a storyline to keep tabs on throughout the regular season in general. The first is, it says, the Magic have ranked in the bottom 10 offensively in each of the last 13 seasons, the second longest streak for any team in the bottom 10 on either end of the floor in 48 years, in which turnover has counted for, trailing only the Wizards' 16 straight seasons as a bottom 10 offense from 1979 to 1994. I've said it on the pod a million times, and I'm going to keep banging this drum until it falls apart. The offensive development of this team this season is more important than anything else. They've been a top 5 defense in back-to-back years. They have been a team that has added significant talent every season over the last 3 to 4 years. Yet, they have stagnated or plummeted in terms of offensive production, dating all the way back to the Aaron Gordon, Nikola Vucevic, right? That era of Orlando Magic basketball. Even them never were able to achieve a top 10 offense. This has been an issue for quite some time, and more particularly in the last 4 to 5 years, where this team has seen significant talent growth, still has been muddied by a lack of efficient offensive production. Some of the things that they were able to do this offseason in terms of acquiring talent, as well as some of the coaching changes, should hopefully create a more flowing offense for this team. And I think the most important player to that, outside of the guys that obviously stick to your mind the most, which Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs, Desmond Bane, Tyus Jones. Tyus Jones, to me, is going to be the guy that I think is going to be able to settle this team down, help create easier shot creation for this team by just making open reads, good decisions, high-level passing options. He's obviously a floor spacer that can add a 40% three-point clip to the outside as well. Tyus Jones, I think, is going to be a very important factor to this team. Keep an eye on that. The second thing that they mentioned, of course, one of their biggest questions is about Franz Wagner. We just discussed that. The second thing that they mentioned that I think is actually equally as important, because they touched on the defense, which we already knew, is last season, the Magic were the worst offensive team to make the playoffs in 29 seasons for which we have the play-by-play data. Their 17 games of shooting less than 25% from three-point range were 3 more than any other team has had in the last 8 seasons. They also shot below 25% from beyond the arc in 2 of their 5 playoff games. Why is this important? Bane, Suggs, Jones, Jace, Tristan. To a lesser degree, Jet Howard. To a lesser degree, Goga Batazde / Wendell Carter Jr. This team not only needs to hit the 3 ball at a much more significant clip, given how historically bad they were last year, this team needs more 3-point volume. This team needs to create a defensive disruptor that goes beyond Franz Wagner slashes, give Paolo Banchero the ball in the post, allow him to operate, let the defense crash on him, and then make a decision. This team needs easy baskets, transition threes, kick out threes, catch and shoot opportunities within the half court. This team needs to be a top half of the league squad in terms of 3-point attempts per game, I think, this season. Now, they probably will not do it. But given the talent that they have, particularly in the backcourt with those 5 guys, Jones, Richardson, Suggs, and Bane, this team, to really open up the offense, I named 4 guys. If you also add Tristan da Silva, who I think had a really strong EuroBasket from beyond the arc, if you talk about those 4 to 5 guys and what they bring to the table efficiency-wise as 3-point shooters, if this team is in the top half of 3-point attempts per game, along with Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, I've touched on this in a prior episode, getting to the line a combined 16 to 20 times a game just between the 2 of them, you are now creating a much more efficient flow offensively for this team, where now they're getting easy looks that are getting them buckets at the free throw line, and you're getting catch and shoot 3 opportunities for a group of guys where you're talking about 4 to 5 players on this team that not last season, no, historically have shot 37+% from beyond the arc, both from the field, catch and shoot opportunities, and or off the dribble. That's not a 1-season sample size. Tristan da Silva, to a lesser degree, is a little bit of that, but again, we have a little bit of EuroBasket to feed off of as well, to say he's taking strides as a 3-point shooter. Jalen Suggs has built a historic run as a knockdown 3-point shooter. Tyus Jones and Desmond Bane are both career 40% 3-point shooters. Jace Richardson in college was a 37% 3-point shooter and shot 42% from beyond the arc in catch and shoot opportunities. That's how quickly the efficiency could change for this team when you're getting to the free throw line 20 times a game just from your two main stars, and you're getting 25 to 28 3-point attempts per game up, putting yourself in the top half of the league in 3-point attempts per game, right? And 28 is still relatively borderline middle, but definitely up there, right? So I don't know if the Orlando Magic are going to do it. I think they're going to float closer to around 20 to 22. But I think if they're somewhere closer to 30 and above, and I think they were in the range of it last year, but like this team needs to be getting near 33-point attempts per game just from those 4 to 5 guys I mentioned at the backcourt. They are too efficient in catch and shoot opportunities and in general from beyond the arc not to be hoisting those things up, because now it puts more pressure on the defense to have to guard on the perimeter, and that leaves even more opportunity for guys like Wagner and Paolo to operate in the painted area and get to the free throw line. So the three-point line is going to be a very huge question for the Orlando Magic this season. Not surprising by any means, given just how bad they were last year as a shooting team. But with the circumstances as they are, this team can only get more efficient if their three-point ball comes with them, because everything else about this team, from a talent perspective, says they should be one of the better offenses in the league. But if they can't hit the three ball at a high clip, they're going to continue this trend of being one of the worst or one of the bottom half of the league offensive teams in the NBA, and we all know that that's not a great formula for being a potential championship winning squad. Let's move on to Bleacher Report's article where they talked about the most chaotic off seasons of the NBA, ranking them from 1 to 30. Now, number 1 on that list is the team that everybody's basically been talking about for the last week now, the LA Clippers, and all the foolishness, I should say, that the Clippers have endured when it comes to the news around Kawhi Leonard and their aspirations to win a championship, so to speak. For those who haven't read the story yet, that's a play on words that'll make sense to you later. If you've already read it, I'm sure you understood. But on that list, the Orlando Magic were ranked as having the 7th most chaotic offseason of anybody in the league. Very simple notes. You gave Paolo Banchero a 5-year extension. You added 2 significant assistant coaches to your main coaching room. You make the first trade of anybody of the offseason by acquiring a player that most probably didn't even know was on the trade block legitimately in Desmond Bane from the Memphis Grizzlies, a trade that was made even before Kevin Durant was moved to Houston, and Kevin Durant being moved anywhere seemed like the first likely domino to fall, yet the Orlando Magic beat him to the punch. And then, of course, you go out, you acquire Tyus Jones, and you make solid draft picks in Jace Richardson and Noah Penda. So, not a loud offseason, probably more chaotic because of the Desmond Bane acquisition itself, and more particularly, they did so by moving off of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who they literally just signed to a 2 to 3 year deal last season to serve the main prioritization purpose. What you traded for in Desmond Bane is the exact reason you acquired KCP in the first place, outside of course, the on-ball chops, which is adding to the three-point acumen of this team. With that being said, we know Desmond Bane's a much better player than KCP, and that was a big upgrade for a team that, again, struck first out of anybody this offseason by making a move that I don't think a lot of people even knew was on the table. So yeah, 7th most chaotic offseason. Definitely an article to take a look at. According to the article, this is the 2nd most chaotic offseason amongst Eastern Conference teams, behind only the Milwaukee Bucks, who of course watched Brook Lopez walk. They now have Kevin Porter Jr. as their starting point guard because they no longer have Damian Lillard, who was going to miss the entirety or at least the majority of this season anyway. They, of course, acquire Miles Turner for essentially, when you factor in the Damian Lillard waive and stretched in order to acquire him, about $50 million a year, which is still pretty insane. And Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to be one of the biggest names in potential trade talks the entire season. And actually, NBA.com did a poll in which they asked a bunch of a bunch of NBA writers, uh, who they believe is the next disgruntled superstar to demand a trade, and I believe that Giannis Antetokounmpo got um 13% of the votes behind like Zion Williamson and I believe like Trae Young and stuff like that. So Giannis is a name that's going to be floating around a lot during the regular season for obvious reasons. If this team is absolute buns, which on paper looks like absolute buns outside of Giannis, but again, Doc Rivers teams tend to overachieve in a real way on a consistent basis. I wouldn't be surprised if this team actually ends up outplaying whatever their over under is. But yeah, the Orlando Magic are a team that didn't do a lot, but did a lot more than most of the East did. And that's what ended up making them the seventh most chaotic team in the NBA, according to Bleacher Report, and the second most chaotic team in the Eastern Conference behind the Milwaukee Bucks. Last but not least, I told you guys that we were going to continue this series because Orlando Magic Daily did two articles, basically a mini series focusing on how each team has their own formula to beat the Orlando Magic, and we would essentially dissect that formula, and then I would give my own personal thoughts on how I think the Orlando Magic can combat those issues that those teams present. And staying with the contending teams, Orlando Magic Daily has the Atlanta Hawks as the second most dangerous contending team in the Eastern Conference to the Orlando Magic this upcoming season. Yes, above the New York Knicks, who will probably be featured in our next episode. And the formula for the Atlanta Hawks against the Orlando Magic is the pick and roll acumen of Trae Young. The notes say, the Orlando Magic and Atlanta Hawks have had some classic battles the last few years, but everything boiled down to stopping Trae Young and containing his overall impact. Last year, Young averaged 28.3 points per game and 9 assists per game in 4 meetings with the Magic last year, including the play-in tournament. He was the central focus for everything for the Hawks. Atlanta is more dangerous this year. The return of Jalon Dixon from a shoulder injury gives them another potential all-star. Fair. And the acquisition of Kristaps Porzingis promises to open up even more space for Young with a legitimate three-point threat alongside him. Last year, Atlanta was 11th in the league, averaging just under a point per possession in pick and rolls with the ball handler, and 12th with 1.1 points per possession with the roll man, according to data from Synergy. The Hawks should be even more dangerous with Young having more weapons and greater control. Again, knockdown three-point shooter also added in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Another season playing next to Dyson Daniels. Another season of development for Zachary Risachet. A healthy season of Jalen Johnson as a rim runner and a guy who can operate on ball as a jumbo wing that has real ball handling chops. And Kristaps Porzingis is probably the first stretch big since John Collins that Trae Young has had as a reliable three-point shooter. And I think you can actually make the argument that Kristaps Porzingis might be an even more dangerous operator in the pick and pop than even John Collins was once upon a time. Because John Collins actually was much more dangerous as a pick and roll threat. He just happened to be a guy who could shoot a relatively high percentage on low volume from beyond the arc as well. Kristaps Porzingis, on the other hand, can shoot a relatively high volume from three-point land and still hit your 37% from back there as well, while being a guy that's 7'1", 7'2", and be a dangerous rim roller. So the Atlanta Hawks, they do pose a real issue. On the other end, the Orlando Magic have a ton of perimeter defenders for Trae Young. Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Tristan Da Silva, to a lesser degree Desmond Bane. There's a lot of different looks that can be presented in terms of trying to contain Trae Young. The pick and pop element is just as dangerous to me as the pick and roll element, because I think that Kristaps Porzingis is going to be somebody that gets featured a lot, especially in the early portions of the season offensively, to get him more acclimated with a guy that I would say is the best passer that he's played with outside of only Luka Doncic back when they played together on the Dallas Mavericks. Other than that, I don't think that Kristaps Porzingis has had a better passing point guard than Trae Young. It's Luka, then Trae Young. After that, the water gets very murky. The reason why the Orlando Magic should not fear the Atlanta Hawks is their matchup diversity against Trae Young and the depth that I think could be thrown at a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, even on the perimeter, with guys like Jonathan Isaac, Goga Batadze, and Mo Wagner, who I think is an interesting defender who moves his feet well, is a guy who I think guards really well in space for his size, and a guy that just happens to be just crazy competitive and can be really physical. And a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, who outside of being injury prone, is also a guy who tends to not do well operating through contact and does not seem to play well against physicality. The Orlando Magic are, I'm not going to say much better than the Atlanta Hawks, because I think that the Atlanta Hawks are going to be a very solid regular season team this year. But if the game is shutting down Trae Young, a healthy version of this Orlando Magic team, I think, does a much better job than allowing nearly 30 points per game and nearly 10 assists from him like they did last year. And I think more particularly because of the depth at the point guard position / shooting guard position that they have, hiding Trae Young is going to be so much more difficult against the Orlando Magic, because you can't hide him against Wendell Carter because he operates best in the post area as it is. So you can't put Trae Young down there. You're not going to hide Trae Young. You're not going to try to put Trae Young on Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero for obvious reasons. And guys like Jalen Suggs and Desmond Bane are two dudes that put a lot of pressure on the rim while also being threats from beyond the arc. Trae Young has to guard somebody, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on him defensively, which is also going to take away from what he can provide on the offensive end as well. I think the Orlando Magic actually match up very well against the Atlanta Hawks, and this might be a little too early to say, but I would say at this moment, I would take the Orlando Magic comfortably in 5 games. Worst case scenario, a close 6-game series if they were to play in the playoffs right now. But with that all being said, you guys let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts on some of these lists, particularly the power rankings where the Orlando Magic are considered the 3rd team in the Eastern Conference. We have been on this train all offseason long. Have your thoughts changed? Have they stayed the same? When it comes to what the Atlanta Hawks bring to the table against the Orlando Magic, similar to me, do you guys not really fear what the Atlanta Hawks can be going up against the Magic if they were to play in a 7-game series? Or do the Atlanta Hawks actually present much more dangerous of a threat to the Magic than I am giving them credit? I'm interested to hear what you guys say in the comment section down below. But with that being said, again, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. Remember to hit that post notification bell, and I will see you guys again tomorrow for some more content. But until then, peace.